Hello there, strange humans. You're listening to the CjH podcast with your host, the CJ Hogan, where we talk movies, TV shows, rants, and more.
Under alien control again?
This is where the fun begins.
Hello there, this is the CjH podcast, and our guest today is a YouTuber who goes by the name of Callum Johns. Welcome to the podcast, and please explain to our listeners what you do.
General Kenobi. Hello. As he said, I'm Callum Johns, and you can find me with just my name on YouTube. And pretty much I do a lot of Star Wars Expanded Universe stuff. And other than that, I'm studying film and TV at the moment, so that's cool.
So, from what I hear, you are involved in the recent Twin Sons Foundation Billboard fundraiser. Will you give our listeners some insight on this topic?
I wasn't directly involved, but I've put it in my bit, and I thought I may as well just do as much as I can to help promote it. Alright, so the Twins, if for people who don't know, there was a billboard that went up in 2016 after The Force Awakens came out, and that's Star Wars, of course, obviously, that was asking for Lucasfilm to continue the expanded universe, which is all of the novels, video games, comics, and the whole universe that got decanonized on April 25th, 2014.
Yes.
And so this time is not just one billboard, but two that they're doing. And it's saying, okay, we let you do the sequel trilogy, and then we're going to ask for it again. And we've got two billboards going up through Twin Sons Foundation to be able to appeal and ask Lucasfilm to help continue the expanded universe. Yeah. The stories that we love that are now labeled Legends.
Exactly. From what I heard, they plan on bringing out Legends as soon as the sequel trilogy ends.
Yeah, there's probably more speculation than anything confirmed.
Obviously, many people have been misinformed about the expanded universe of Star Wars, mainly due to the lies of the media and Disney.
A lot of misinformation that goes around.
Yes, they always use this one quote from George Lucas about how this isn't my canon and all that.
Lucas has never actually said the word canon.
Exactly, that's my belief. So what are your thoughts on this, and what do you think can be done to make more people interested in the expanded universe?
I think the main thing to get people interested in the EU is just to share the stories about it. And some people say they don't want to get into it because it's not canon, but I think that just is an excuse, because they're great stories, and even if they're not canon, then you can still really enjoy them, especially if you're unhappy with the new direction that Lucasfilm under Disney have taken with Star Wars. Then you can go back to beforehand and experience a great storyline.
I remember growing up with the whole Escape the Death Star action figure board game.
Oh, that's cool.
My older brother had that, and it was a fun game.
Nice. I never got into the board games quite as much, but I do have a couple. Like Star Wars Monopoly, more mainstream ones.
Yeah, I was definitely big into Phantom Menace because that was my first introduction to Star Wars.
Yeah, I thought Maul was cool, and I've always enjoyed the prequels, even if people don't like the execution of some of the ideas as much. It's still got a great story.
I was definitely an Obi-Wan fan, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, Ewan McGregor and Ian McDermott, best actors of the prequels.
Absolutely.
So yeah, after they decanonized, I got inspired to collect everything and started reading chronologically as best I know how. And then in October last year, I started doing stuff on YouTube because I was starting to just write down the points of what I thought of each of the books on social media and stuff, and they were getting so long because I went quite in depth with it that I thought, well, this would be more easily digested as a video. And I've always enjoyed watching Matt Wilkins's Expanded Universe reviews, and I like that format, so I thought I'd just start doing my own, which, if you go back to my first EU review, is interesting to see how different they are to my recent ones, because I've improved a lot. And so I started with that. Yeah, production value. Started with Allegiance, because that's where I was up to, which is the first book in the Hand of Thrawn duology, out of interest. And yeah, I've been going from there, and I started doing video games because I've always felt like in high school I love watching gaming videos on YouTube and that. And I felt that's something that's really fun and enjoyable as well that I like to do, and so I started doing that with Star Wars games. I actually started with Shadows of the Empire because I was reviewing Shadows of the Empire, and I thought, well, at the same time as I'm reviewing it, I may as well play the game, and then, well, I'm doing YouTube, so I may as well record it. And so that's how that started.
Yes.
And
So,
it's cool.
yeah. So, do you have any shoutouts on social media you would like to mention?
Sorry, what was that? I didn't quite catch you.
Do you have any shoutouts on social media that you would like to mention? Like any projects?
I don't have a particular extra project at the moment, but as far as something that I did put a lot of work into was creating my own expanded universe timeline. And I have a video that I live streamed about a month ago where I went through that, and it's got the document in the description with the link and whatnot. That took a while. I was working on that for a while because I found that out of all of the timelines that you can go to, not one timeline had every single expanded universe piece of material. And I found that you go to Wikipedia, it's out of order. It doesn't make sense. And you go to Joe Bongiorno's timeline.net, which is really good. He mixes canons, and I'm not very keen on that. Plus,
there's always something missing in the timeline.
Yeah, plus he's also missed stuff. Which, I mean, I didn't reach out to him quite then, but apparently he's approachable. But I thought, out of all the timelines, I should just create my own. And I got inspired by someone else on Facebook that went to start theirs, but then they sort of petered off. But I just committed to it. Created mine in a way that doesn't break up the chapters as well, because that annoyed me with Joe's timeline, is he breaks up the chapters in the books in chronological order. So when you're reading the book, when you're looking at mine, you can read the whole book or the whole comic. And sometimes I split up the issues, but that's okay because reading order's okay when you're reading between issues.
Yeah. What would you say to someone that says that there's, contradictions in the expanded universe? And
I would say there's very few continuity errors in the EU.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between saying contradiction and continuity error as well. Because contradictions are when someone says something from their point of view, but it ends up being the same meaning in the same story. Whereas continuity error is when something actually conflicts. But as far as that goes, you have the canon tier levels. So a lot of the stuff people bring up, like Skippy the Jedi Droid and Mount Sorrow, and that are in S canon, which the events happened, but not exactly the details as presented.
Yeah. Absolutely, because a lot of people, they were disappointed with Last Jedi and a lot of those newer movies, right? So, recently, Lucasfilm did leave some breadcrumbs, I guess, with Marvel Legends Release 108. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so 108 was a step. Marvel saw that there was people still asking for more EU Legends stories, and so they said, okay, for our 80th anniversary, we're going to do something, just an extra issue, continuing the old Marvel run that we did. But in the end, that sort of lost popularity, and then the rights went to Dark Horse afterwards, who continued doing Star Wars comics when it picked up later on.
Yeah.
And yeah, on 108, I think it's a great addition. It's a really enjoyable storyline. And without getting too far into it, there were one or two things that they could have paid a little bit more mind to continuity, but I think overall it's a step and it's a really enjoyable story.
Absolutely. When I first got into Legends and the Expanded Universe, it was mainly the prequel lore, the Obi-Wan story. And you talked a little bit of Dark Horse, and that was definitely one of the things that I grew up on. So what are your thoughts on the change between Dark Horse and Marvel?
So the first change, where it went from Marvel to Dark Horse, I think that was a great decision. Because, well, Star Wars kept Marvel afloat so they could actually continue to start with. But when the Star Wars run was losing popularity, Dark Horse picked it up, and they've done amazing storylines within the EU. And some of those comics are amazing. You don't really need to check some of them out. Even Dark Empire, people think the Cloned Emperor is a bad idea, but the way they execute it, I think, is done quite well.
Which is kind of ironic now that they're supporting the Emperor coming back for episode 9.
Yeah, because one of the things they used to say that was stupid in the EU was bringing back the Emperor, and if they're praising the new movie, then they're hypocrites.
Exactly. So there was a canceled novel about Marriage Age, I believe. What's the story on that?
Cancelled novel about Mara Jade.
Or was it Jaina Solo?
Oh, Jaina Solo, yeah. So the Sword of the Jedi trilogy was planned to have been coming out along with other projects that were cancelled at the time when the EU was decanonized, which is one of the main things why we wanted to continue this, because they never actually continued the timeline compared to if they had continued it, we wouldn't be worried as much about it. We would have got over our hate for the new canon and then just stuck with the EU.
Yeah. I understand the feeling of like a cliffhanger show being cancelled and all that. That's
And the story with Sword of the Jedi was that they actually had the draft of the first book done, as far as I'm aware. But then when the decanonization happened, they cancelled it, and it was going to be a trilogy about Jaina Solo, and well, Jaina Solo fell, and probably going to involve just after Crucible with her becoming part of the Fel Empire and dealing with what happened to Kaidos and everything like that.
Yes. My idea of it is they were working on a multimedia project with, Crucible, Underworld, 1313.
Yeah, I think 1313 would have been set earlier. But I know that there was a planned multimedia project between 1313 and the Underworld TV show.
Yeah. There's definitely room after Crucible to make a story.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Because you've got, 3 or 4 generations before the Legacy comics, and there's a huge gap there.
Absolutely. So, I hear Matt Wilkins has joined the fandom mess. What are your thoughts on that?
Have you? That's not true.
I know it's not true.
He's not a fan of Menacer because they have completely different goals.
Yes. A lot of media wrongfully portray them as a hate group, but there is diverse in opinions.
So there's a particular group of people that hates on the fandom Menace a lot. And they base a lot of what they're assuming about everyone on a couple of people that they don't like within it.
Exactly. There's always going to be a few bad apples.
Yeah.
I myself used to kind of make fun of them until I got to know a few of them. So.
Yeah, and you can still make fun of the specific people, but you don't like the fandom Menace.
Yeah.
But the thing with Matt was that he reached out to someone that suddenly came up in the fandom Menace that seemed sudden to me, talking about the EU stuff, and his name's Ryan Kinnell, and he's actually been a decent bloke when I've talked to him. And Ryan reached out because there's been what he's done is gone in as a fandom Menace and featured on the Geeks and Gamers YouTube channel, done videos for that, and it's creating a big positive change for people in Menace to actually find the EU. And even earlier today, I was talking to Mary Mayhem, who's another fandom Menace, and she was saying...
I'll leave a link in the description, obviously, for others if they want to check that out.
Yeah, cool. And what she was saying in that is that she's actually just read Enter the Empire, and she's feels like I'll use my own analogy, the void in her that was left after the Last Jedi shattered her and made her angry and everything, has started to be filled by the EU, and she's finding that she can find more of her love for Star Wars and for these stories that she goes, this is Luke Skywalker, and not how the characters were treated in the new movies.
Yes. I noticed that
so on and so forth.
Disrespecting of the original characters in the new canon.
Yeah. I mean, looking at it trying to look at it from a more objective viewpoint, they did what they thought they wanted to do with the characters, but the issue is that they skipped 30 years, and so we didn't go along the journey with them to be able to see how they became like how they became.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that Pablo recently, before he locked his Twitter, of course, mentioned that he wanted to skip a couple of generations and just have, like, C-3PO.
Oh, so just like the Legacy comics.
Yes, exactly. And what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, good. If they can create good stories on their own without taking stuff from the EU, then go for it. It'll probably be decent. The issue is that they've got lower quality story writing, and they just take things from the EU when they decanonize it, so they may as well have just kept the EU canon.
Yeah, and when they do make good stories, they always tend to make them shit.
Yeah, like Dr. Aphra, for example.
Exactly.
I don't know if this would know Dr. Aphra very well, but I listened to Dr. Aphra on Comic Story, and actually, they're a good YouTube channel that does dramatic comics and stuff.
Yeah, they've gone through a new channel update. They're changing their name again to Star Wars Audio Comics.
Because Comic Story did some Star Wars comics, but then they sort of stopped doing them. I think they weren't very popular.
Oh, yeah,
'Cause-
comics were-
And yeah, they did the first part of Dr. Aphra, and it actually was pretty good from what I saw. But then I heard about what they did with Dr. Aphra later, and it's like, why do you have to just seem to? What I've heard from people who've read it, it didn't make sense within the story to make her a lesbian or bi or whatever. It was all sudden and didn't quite flow properly, which is where the main issue is.
Yeah, it just came out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
But so I hear that the Marvel 108 has a few contradictions. Would you like to explain to our listeners what it almost seems like Disney doesn't care enough to keep it solid?
I think it's more the writers than I'd attribute to Disney itself, because Marvel themselves wanted to do it and got permission from Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
Which they'd have to just, well, they don't care about continuity as much as they used to anyway, because they said it's not such a big thing for the new canon now, which is probably part of it. But if you want me to go into it a bit more, they go on. Alright, they go on in the earlier Marvel comics I was reading about Valence being half human, half droid body, half robot, as a cyborg. But then in Marvel issue 108, they actually have his whole exoskeleton looking like the Terminator, and he only really has his brain that's left.
Yeah.
Which didn't quite make sense to me. Plus, the liquid that he fell into melts metal in a few hours, and he survived for 7 years, I think it was.
Yes.
Inside of that. And they said it was some sort of tough Durasteel, which, I mean, the way I'd write it is that they find his head case, so he had a special head casing made of a tougher material like cortosis, or a material like that that can withstand blasts of fire from capital ships and lightsabers and that. I'd have that. That'd be more believable. And then the people that find his head casing rebuild him, and then he reactivates and does his thing. That'd make more sense to me to have him as a fully droid body.
Yes.
Compared to just suddenly he is, compared to the comics earlier going on about him being half droid, half human.
Now, would you rate that better or worse than the new canon novels?
And I enjoyed the story in that I can't really speak on a lot of the new canon because the two books that I tried first, one was the must read before The Force Awakens, Aftermath by Chuck Wendig.
And we all know how bad that Aftermath book is.
Yeah, and the second one was the Force Awakens novelization, because I'm like, surely they must do a bit better job in the book than the movie. And neither of them really hooked me to want to read any more of them, so I just let the visual media try and impress me into it.
Yeah, from what I hear, what's her name that did Lost Stars? She,
Claudia Gray.
Yes, Claudia Gray. She's been doing pretty good with the new canon so far.
Yeah, I've heard that she does well with what she writes, which is good.
Yes. I read some of the Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan novel. It seems pretty interesting.
So, will you tell our listeners which one would be your favorite story in the expanded universe?
Would you
Just one?
recommend it?
Just one?
No. Any.
I do have a video on suggestions of where to start with the EU, which is probably what I'm going to do here, because it's easier to do.
Let's hear your top 5.
Top 5? Well, I'd say where to start depends on where your interests are in that. But the probably best place to start would be with the Thrawn trilogy, which starts with Heir to the Empire, second one is Dark Force Rising, and the third one is The Last Command. I sort of lumped them all in together because they're one story.
We'll count that as one.
Because they're all really good. They're the spiritual sequel trilogy, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they, in 1991, Enter the Empire was the first novel published after Return of the Jedi, and really sparked off the interest with the EU on getting more stories done.
Yeah. A lot of people were excited when they brought Thrawn back, but they kind of nerfed him for the new
Yeah, and they gave him they sort of copied and pasted and then tweaked some things so he isn't as good.
Yeah.
Because they should have killed more people in Rebels. Oh yeah. I haven't read the Thrawn novels, but I've heard they're just not quite as good as the older ones.
Absolutely. I did like the audiobooks. That I must, if I was to praise one thing, that would be that.
People rave about the audiobooks, so that's cool. I'm just not as much of an audiobook person. I usually sit down and read the physical copy.
Yeah.
So yeah, after that I'd say definitely check out the Darth Bane trilogy. Another trilogy.
Yeah. Lots of trilogies.
So you have there's Path of Destruction first, and then Rule of Two, and then the third one is titled Dynasty of Evil. And that basically tells the story of Darth Bane, who was a character created by George Lucas, and then how he formed the Rule of Two and started off what ends up being the rule of Darth Sidious as the Emperor. And
kind of ruined the Clone Wars, I guess. But no, take what you will from it. I mean, take Clone.
Oh yeah, the 2008 Clone Wars is quite a divisive topic in the EU community and as a whole. At least the later seasons contradicted a lot with previously established material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are your
droid
cartoons?
The Droids cartoons, I still need to watch all of them. I've seen bits and pieces. But I find it really interesting. They're entertaining. They're kids' shows, of course. And they're entertaining. And it's interesting to note a lot of the things in Droids George Lucas reuses later on, like Grievous's wheel bike comes from Droids.
Yeah.
And of course, you got the Kybo Ren as a pirate and stuff.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note some ideas that George Lucas may have had that they used in there that he later reused. It's similar to Splinter of the Mind's Eye in that respect.
Yeah.
Splinter of the Mind's Eye has a lot of ideas that you can see that George Lucas reused the sorts of ideas that were in that.
So I've heard Splinter of the Mind's Eye that was made as a sequel to Star Wars had Star Wars flop. So is it considered canon within the expanding universe?
Well, yeah, everything is.
Yeah.
There was a comic that was released later because you got to keep in mind that it was released before Empire Strikes Back came out, so they didn't even know that Luke and Leia were siblings, and they had a different perception of how the story would look at that time.
There's definitely some creepy undertones in that story.
Yeah, they have the whole Luke and Leia romance because they don't know their siblings. Which, to be honest, it makes sense because they don't know their siblings and they're trying to reconcile their feelings towards each other.
Yes.
It's like
there.
Yeah. The old Marvel comics do it as well. They have Luke and Leia kissing multiple times in the old Marvel comics.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. But as far as Splinter of the Mind's Eye, it is everything's considered some form of canon other than the Infinities. storylines and a bunch of the Tales comics.
Yes.
Infinity's logo on it. And what with Splinter of the Mind's Eye, what they did was they released a comic adaptation later on, which cleared up a few of the more major inconsistencies with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is good. And it's interesting because Han Solo isn't in it because Harrison Ford hadn't signed on for another movie at the time.
Yeah. And he was very, let's just say disagreeable about where they wanted to push.
Oh yeah, they didn't know if they were going to get him for the next movie or not if Star Wars flopped.
Yeah.
It's still a really fun book though. I quite enjoyed reading it.
Yes. So, now, obviously, our viewers might be interested in where are you from? What's the story? What's Callum Johns, the Star Wars story? What got you into YouTubing and the expanded universe? And how long have you been on YouTube?
Okay, so for me, well, I'm Aussie from Australia, I should say, rather than just Aussie Australian.
Good day,
Well, I don't actually remember seeing my first Star Wars movie, but I do have records because I just watched them so many times. I've seen them.
Star Wars fan.
Star Wars is a lifestyle. I have record. There's a fact file I have. As a kid, I filled out stuff about Revenge of the Sith, and I said my favorite part was when Anakin was burnt into lava in the wording.
What a great moment.
And so from that, as I grew up, I love reading, and so I was looking into Star Wars books a bit and stuff. I never got as many. I read the Jedi Academy trilogy first, was my proper EU book.
Yeah.
Outside of, I'd ordered some books from Scholastic when I was in school, and I thought they were the full novelizations, but they were the junior ones.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I've got
That was a series, Jedi Apprentice, that they never, you could never find the full series, I found.
Yeah. That's tricky, but you can find things online. And yeah, from that,
But back then there was no online.
So I'd watch the movies. I got into the movies pretty easily. They hooked me, as it would, I'm sure, a lot of listeners, the original trilogy and the prequels. And I ended up just wanting to know more about the universe, and so a lot of my knowledge beforehand came from Wikipedia, because we didn't have money to buy all the books. And my parents are Star Wars fans and didn't know really anything about the books or anything.
Yeah, as a lot of people, they read on Wikipedia and that's their knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Alex.
Wikipedia has been getting worse and worse as time goes by.
Yeah, it almost seems like they're not, paying attention to it.
Oh, I forget where I saw the interview, but I remember reading an interview where one of the Wikipedia editors or staff members or something just said they don't really care about keeping up the database much anymore after the decanonization, because all their hard work went into something that got decanonized.
Yes, and basically Disney has their own version of the databank, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
So they really,
But yeah, I guess back to my story. The EU was decanonized, and that inspired me to be purposely, actively collect more of the Star Wars novels. And I didn't realize exactly how many there were at the start, but once I committed to it, I went. But so I started getting them digitally first, because that's easier. And then I started getting the physical copies. But I started reading chronologically, I think, in 2016, from Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void, which is the first novel.
Yeah.
And so I've been reading for a while, sharing being part of social media stuff. I was around when the original Billboard campaign was going on and in planning and whatnot, and I thought that was really cool because I wanted to continue the stories as well because I'd heard about 1313 and all that. Oh yeah, childhood Star Wars games were Star Wars Battlefront 2, 2005 by Pandemic, and I played The Force Unleashed, the PlayStation 2 versions. I even have a PlayStation 1 game called Star Wars Demolition.
Like, for example, I heard this on the Matt Wilkins stream tonight. The Crying Mountain was viewed through the Ewoks' point of view.
Yeah, Matt Wilkins presented that idea. And, I mean, the holiday special could be the Wookiees all high on their special magic mushrooms.
Most likely.
So I wouldn't be surprised
So,
if Ewoks were high on imagining things either.
yeah. Secret.
As far as that goes as well, I'd say just read the EU and you'll see that a lot of the things do end up lining up. Boba Fett, when things really needed to happen, like Boba Fett's origin story, they were retconned to make sense. And I think the only really huge prevalent one is between Labyrinth of Evil and the 2003 Clone Wars micro series, with what Jedi were present as Grievous captured Palpatine. Others are tiny nitpicks.
Yeah, I know one of the problems I had was the many deaths of Shakti.
Yeah, well, I noticed I said this in my E was a mess video because defending the expanded universe videos have been going out recently as well, and the last one's going to go out soon. But in the Ultimate Visual Guide by Ryder Winham, it actually says that George Lucas said the deleted scenes weren't canon.
Yes, although that kind of makes a contradiction with the ending of 2003's Clone Wars, where Shakti is captured. It kind of culminates that story ending, I guess.
And I have to remember exactly everything as well, because after a while details fade. But yeah, it makes sense to me because apparently in the deleted scene, Shakti was in the Jedi Temple during Order 66 and whatnot, and got killed by Anakin. But George said no, the deleted scenes were deleted for a reason.
Yes.
And so they're not canon. The only parts where deleted scenes are canon, though, are when they're included in the novels.
Yeah. Like, there's this one scene with the Yoda arriving on Dagobah, which was quite beautiful.
Yeah. The Revenge of the Sith novel is great. It's the best movie. Well, Matthew Stover, I saw in a video, approached the Revenge of the Sith novel as a companion piece to the movie and not as an adaptation of the movie. I think that works brilliantly.
Yeah, I know. As much as I love that movie, I know that there's lots of cringe moments.
And yeah, and sometimes it makes sense that there's cringe moments, because Anakin grew up in the Jedi Temple, with no social skills with women that he falls in love with or whatever.
Which makes sense. I mean, he was brought into the Jedi Order as a young.
Yeah. It's great.
So yeah, are there any other things you'd like to talk about before we wrap this up?
What's your experience with the expanded universe?
My experience, Yeah, it would definitely be Episode 1, Phantom Menace. Yeah, I was definitely into the whole Obi-Wan story in the expanded universe.
Nice.
As a kid, I really loved those, the Qui-Gon, the Anakin. I was definitely into anything that was related to Darth Vader. I would definitely pick up and go to the library and just read.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. As a kid, we didn't have much money, right? So That was
Yeah.
my experience.
Pretty much me lending books from the library and everything.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, for junior novels, the Jedi Apprentice series is brilliant.
Yeah.
And don't knock Galaxy of Fear either. When I read it, I really enjoyed those.
That's a definitely underrated series that not many people have heard of.
Yeah. People just think, oh, Star Wars Goosebumps. Yeah. But they actually present some really interesting ideas, and John Whitman created a bunch of connections with the other EU material in that as well.
Absolutely. So, yeah, thank you for coming on to the CjH podcast and doing this interview. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So, yeah. So, we'll definitely do this another time, obviously, if you have time. So, yeah. So, yeah, this was Callum Johns, and we'll see you in the next one.
This is the CjH podcast. We talk movie reviews, speculations, and a little bit more. That's all.
Moi moi!
Jar Jar, it's Palpatine. Look, I need to apologize for manipulating you into granting me emergency powers. It was wrong, and I'm sorry.
Oh, say yes! Right, Palpy. You some manipulated me. Okay, Papi.
Beware. Conspiracy Hour with the CjH.
The Reddit theory that Jar Jar is a trained Force user or a knowing Sith Master brings into question of Jar Jar Binks and whether or not he is more than a bumbling idiot as he portrays himself as. That he is in fact a highly skilled Force user in terms of martial arts ability and mind control. We will go further in and explore how he was more than simply a political tool used to further Palpatine's plans on taking over the universe and galaxy. Whether he and Palpatine were in cahoots together from the very beginning. But it's entirely possible that Palpatine was but the learner, and Jar Jar was the master. We roll our eyes and assume this is dumb luck, but is it? Because Obi-Wan once said,
"In my experience, there's no such thing as luck."
We begin in Phantom Menace, where Jar Jar is seen as a skilled warrior, which is often suggested in the Star Wars mythos that very rarely do we ever see normal characters showing off extraordinary stunt work or physical feats, unless they are Jedi, Sith, or at least Force sensitive, like Broom Boy from Last Jedi. So when we are introduced to Jar Jar, we first see him performing a 24-foot leap into the lakes of Naboo. Now, taken out of context, if you are watching a Star Wars movie and saw a character casually execute such a move, you'd most likely assume it was a Jedi or a Sith. In the context of Jar Jar, though, we don't, because elsewhere he is so far convinces us that he is nothing more than a harmless dunce with weird dialogue and cowardly act. He also manages to convince us that he's a bumbling oaf in midst of the Naboo battle with the droids, even though he's always an incredibly successful in single-handedly taking on a battle droid tank or unleashing a bunch of Boombas onto a battle droids and precisely targeting multiple enemies with a blaster tangled around his ankle. We roll our eyes. This is one of the main reasons we, as an audience, hate Jar Jar so much. He breaks the fourth wall. He destroys our suspense of disbelief because we know that no one is really that lucky. We just dismiss it as a cliché trope of a silly, pathetic comic relief who seems ironically to save the day. Of course, we can see this as a deliberate act by Jar Jar himself and by the writers and the animators, as we know Jedi themselves are inspired by the Shia monks
And Jar Jar's attitude is modeled off a certain kung fu discipline, which allows him to appear goofy and clumsy, even as he seemingly lays way to his enemies, namely martial arts move Wu Shu. But that's not all. Of course, even if this was not true, it should at least keep us suspicious of his character, period. It establishes that he is over-the-top childish, and his acts are masking a mysterious character, versus what we are led to believe. But that's not all. During the events where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan rescued the Queen, we see Jar Jar use the Force as he drops from the opposite side of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan in a leap of an amazing feat which would be impossible without the use of the Force. He's also as stealthy as the Jedi in the scene. In fact, let's take a look at said scene. Now, as I said, he catches a hold of the balcony on the far right side, but then he drops to the ground on the left, easily to dismiss as a continuity error or framing error, but one of the droids continued to fire on Jar Jar, or at least where he should be, which means the animators knew where Jar Jar was supposed to be. He tricks the droid into thinking he would do one thing, but does an entirely different move. Something we see Obi-Wan use later against Darth Maul in the Duel of Fates. Still not convinced? Jar Jar uses mind control like most Jedi use the Force to mind trick others. He is able to convince everyone to promote him, when otherwise, why would anyone promote a bumbling buffoon within the ranks of the military, or politicians, for that matter? He uses hand waves as the Jedi use.
I don't know.
Just take a look at the scenes.
I hope not.
We's a warriors. We's got a grand army.
Jar Jar bring Usen and the Naboo together.
No.
So, we shall make you Bombard General.
He waves his hands to convince Boss Nass to give him the general job. He waves his hands toward a promotion to the Senate, and he finally uses the Force to convince the Galactic Senate to give emergency powers to Palpatine. Now, if Palpatine and Jar Jar are in this together, then it means he is not a fool, and if he is not a fool, then it means he is something else entirely. Now, why would Palpatine keep him around if he was not something else entirely? That is the question. And remember, Palpatine and Jar Jar are from the same planet, Naboo. Of course, we also have a quote from George Lucas that suggests that Jar Jar was supposed to be a mirror of the Yoda character. A mindless and ridiculous character who turns out to be a Jedi or Sith master.
Jar Jar is a key to all this. If we get Jar Jar working, because he's a funnier character than we've ever had in any of the movies before.
No. The same fan devotion that did the Phantom Edit is the same fan devotion that came up with Darth Jar Jar. So much so that I get asked all the time, is Jar Jar a Sith Lord? I can't say yes or no, right? It's really a George Lucas question. You got to ask George. But I think what's interesting is that fan devotion saw through a lot of the things that a lot of people didn't see. There was a lot about my performance as Jar Jar that I put in there that unless you knew something about things, you wouldn't get, right? Drunken style Shaolin Kung Fu is a big deal. I did a lot of it as Jar Jar, and the Darth Jar Jar theory caught it. I never thought anybody would see that. You know, I never thought anybody would be influenced by that. But I loved Jackie Chan, and I was a huge Jackie Chan fan. And everybody who knows me knows that Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan were my guys growing up. And I watched Drunken Master and Drunken Master 2 thousands of times, right? So of course, a lot of my physicality comes from me watching Jackie Chan movies. And there was a lot of it that was drunken style Kung Fu. Now, for somebody to take the time to look at that and write something, you have to care. You have to care a lot.
Now, it's possible that after the backlash, George Lucas was forced to change his plans. If you watch the Attack of the Clones, you will also notice that Count Dooku is underdeveloped as a character, almost as if he was thrown in after the change of the original plans. In fact, even the original title was to be called Jar Jar's Big Adventure. So what do you think? Do you think Jar Jar is a Dark Lord of the Sith? Or is this just mere fan speculation and or memes? Comment below, let us know what you believe. If you want to stay up to date with the CjH podcast, then subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.
If you want to listen to more episodes of the CjH podcast, there's a link in the description. We'll see you there.
And as always, see you in the next one.
This next song will be a parody.
This Star Destroyer is closing in, just a matter of time now. Stormtroopers will board our ship, we might not make it out. So I'll record this message with these secret plans, and then send these droids to Tatooine. The rest is in your hands, Obi-Wan. You're my only hope, Obi-Wan. In case you didn't know, this is our most desperate hour. This isn't just for show. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. My father begs of you to help him with his struggle in this war. He needs someone strong and wise with experience like yours. And this vital information that's stored inside R2, it needs to get to him on Alderaan.